Team for Change. Before we get started, Lori gave a nice introduction, so I don't really need to tell you any of this stuff, but this is my background. And the most recent thing is tomorrow, I'm accepting the award for the Organization Development Network's Article of the Year for the Organization Development Review. So I'm very excited about that. We did some work with students at Bowling Green State University to take their doctoral research and get it published. Lori is going to monitor the chat. If anybody has questions, feel free to put them in there and I will address them as we go along. So this is a great little schematic about change. And it's about things that happen when little pieces of change aren't addressed, right? So if you're missing vision, there can be confusion. If you're missing skills, there can be anxiety. And as a practitioner, when I first started consulting, I loved this graphic because I felt like it really put into perspective all of the things that you needed in order to successfully institute change. Unfortunately, it's missing stuff. And I figured that out as I would go through, and some of my projects worked out great and some of them didn't. And so this is this book, and what I'm talking about today is what I discovered to be missing. And so I'm going to talk about those things. The first thing that I think is really important to think about is the idea of change versus transition. So change, you know, is plotted on a calendar. You can move forward and change by, you know, setting deadlines and, you know, specifically executing specific tasks. But transition is a little bit of a different process. Transition is the shift in an individual's mind about what's happening. So change is plotted on a calendar and transition happens in a person's head. And that's the difference. When we look at change, there's elements of trust and risk that are present, right? Trust is the idea of willing to be vulnerable. Risk is actually doing it, right? And so to be a trusting person, you have positive expectations about the things that are going to happen in a change scenario. And then doubt is a measure of, you know, risk is a measure of doubt. So when you're not quite sure what's going on and you're not feeling particularly confident, you're looking at risk. And the recipe for trust, the way I like to talk about trust is oftentimes we're lacking trust. There's a problem with trust. We don't always define it. And so I think defining trust is really very important. And so in my view, trust is when there's consistency between the things that you say and the things that you do. So that consistency matters. When there's a break in that consistency and there's something that all of a sudden is a little bit an aberration, you say something and then you do something that's inconsistent with that, you lose trust. And trust is very hard to regain once you've lost it. But there is a recipe, and I wanted to share that recipe with you. And this is from Frances Frye from Harvard University. And this is her research she did actually with Uber. And she developed this recipe for trust. And basically, it's three elements. It's authenticity, empathy, and logic. So what she means is that, are you being consistent? So you have to start that consistency piece. And are you being who you are? Are you being you? The next is about empathy. Are you empathizing with the people that you're working with? Are you letting them know that you really understand their perspective? And so you can't phone that in, right? You have to be really present with them. And then the next one is logic. And oftentimes what makes for a really good story when you're storytelling is not the thing that makes for a good argument to be persuasive. So in a story, we kind of, you know, go around and tell interesting facts about this or that. But in a persuasive piece, which is what we're trying to do when we're working in change, is about lining up our narrative facts and leading with the headline and then going for support. And so once we've got authenticity, empathy, and logic in place, we have the ability to build trust again or rebuild trust. The next big factor in driving change is people and understanding the differences about people. And these were some of the ones that jumped out to me as I wrote the book. The first is about knowledge workers. And when we're thinking about knowledge workers, we're thinking about people who transform things with their brains, not with their hands. And that's the difference between a knowledge worker and, say, a carpenter. Not that they don't use knowledge, they absolutely do. But knowledge workers are people who transform the product with their brain. So knowledge workers are much more invested in their careers, and their identity tends to be tied up with the things that they're doing. So they spend a lot of time often getting education. They are committed to a particular discipline, and then they work there. And so they have a little bit of their identity tied up with it, what it is that they're doing. And so their commitment is really important when you're trying to drive change. The next piece is about how we work together. And and I don't know how much people are familiar with this idea, but there's 3 basic managerial models around how we work together: theory X, theory Y, and theory Z. Theory X says that people are lazy and they don't want to work, and you have to force them with rules and threats and coercive behavior, so that people are lazy and they don't want to work. Theory Y says the opposite. This is Douglas McGregor's work, and Douglas McGregor says that people innately want to work. It's as natural to them as play. They want to contribute, they want to be there, and all you really have to do is remove the barriers for them. And theory Z goes a little bit further than theory Y, and it says that yes, people want to work, they want to do this, then it is natural to them, but in order for them to be truly invested, they need to have an alignment between the value set of the organization itself and themselves. They want to feel like they're contributing to the values and the furtherance of the mission of that organization. So for example, let's say you work as a cafeteria worker in a hospital, and you really believe in the healing mission of the hospital. You really believe in the power of nutrition to drive people's health. You're a person who is in a theory Z organization. You have alignment between what it is that you're doing and what it is the organization is doing, what you're both trying to accomplish. So that's theory Z. And then we have generational cohorts. How much are we hearing about this these days, right? So Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, baby boomers. And now the new one is Gen Alpha. My son is a Gen Alpha and he's 11. So we don't know about them in the workplace yet, but they are definitely digital natives. And he told me that he was going to make a company when he grows up that only has robots and no people. So that gives you an idea of where Gen Alpha is going. But what's interesting about the generational cohorts theory is that we hear a lot of things on Instagram or Facebook about the differences between these generational cohorts. That baby boomers are resistant to technology, that Zoomers or Gen Z are people who are extremely comfortable with technology. But really what it boils down to is an idea called meta stereotypes, and that we perceive differences among these groups, but really there's very little difference. And the research bears that out. But it is our perception of difference that drives the meaning of generational cohorts and change. So we start thinking about, oh, well, that person, they're going to be, resistant to this because of their experience and blah, blah, blah. it is actually the stereotype that is driving that, not really the data. The next piece of people and our differences is intercultural, right? The United States is full of a variety of people from across the world, and cultural differences can really can give momentum and variety and innovation to change. It can help us solve problems more creatively than we thought we could. And so that is a really important piece in driving a successful change, is to think about the ways in which we can leverage diversity to our advantage. People will see problems differently. They see through the lens of their own experience. And by having teams that are multicultural, we can actually drive greater and greater performance. And then the last piece is, how engaged and involved are people? How are they feeling about what it is that we're doing, and how involved they want to be in it? People who are engaged in their work are far more likely to go further and be firmly committed to change efforts than people who are less engaged. One of the pieces that's important for change to leverage is the idea of shared vision. So one of the things that I like, the example that I like to give around shared vision, is imagine yourself standing on a pillar 50 feet in the air. So it's like a 2-foot pillar, you're up on the top of this thing, and it's just you standing there. And there's another one relatively close by. And then your boss comes along and says, hey, Lori, I'd like for you to jump from your pillar over to that pillar right there. It's not far, you can do it. You would think long and hard about that, wouldn't you? You would say, I could fall. And that would be very bad. What's wrong with this pillar, right? So we need to give people a reason to want to jump. Why do I want to go? Where am I going? What makes that pillar better than this pillar? Because it's a danger to make that jump. And so we need to present what's better about that pillar in ways that are meaningful to people, right? There's got to be a rationale presented that makes it persuasive to want to make that jump. So you have to engage people in the vision that you're trying to tell them about that other pillar. Is it the right course of action? Do people believe that that pillar is better than the other? So that it's important to make that vision compelling and vivid, and showing the progress that the organization can have. And that is leadership, right? There's 140 formal academic definitions of the term leadership. But I like to use my own because it's simple. And I like to say leadership is an influence process. So the ability to influence people, to make a change, to join in a vision, is influence, right? The ability to be persuasive. And leadership sets the tone for how we're going to work together, right? They provide that rationale for change. They leverage the mission, and they can help you become that Theory Z employee, because they can help you find that commonality between what the organization is doing and what your role in it is, and how you help the organization to fulfill its mission. So if you remember nothing else of anything that I say in this talk, remember this. This is the key. The quality of our communication during a change initiative is the primary factor for success. So the better the communication is, the more likely people will be to engage in the process, and the more likely it is that your change will be successful. The quality of the communication is the primary factor for success. But you're saying to me now, Deb, come on, how do I do that? How do I make, communication good? How do I make it a quality thing? How do I bring it to the next level? And one of the things that I think is really interesting in organizations is that when we try and get messages out, we see lots of, it's like a little game of telephone when we were at a party game in grammar school, right? You'd whisper in somebody's ear and then they'd whisper what they thought you said. And then when it came out at the other end, it's a completely different thing. That's the name of the game, unfortunately. Really only 20% of a message that we put out there actually conveys its meaning, gets across. What happens is that messages become changed as we put them out there. So they get sharpened. Sometimes that's sharpening your message is good because it makes things more precise, right? But it also can get condensed so that it's shorter and it's easier to communicate, right? So, and it'll highlight very specific things. Those may or may not be the things you want highlighted. And that's important as a change manager. You want to think, what is it, if my message is condensed, what are they going to pick up on? Assimilated. So the idea with assimilated messages is that people smooth it out a little bit, right? They say, okay, this is an interesting idea, but it doesn't jive with this thing that we did 3 months ago. So I'm going to just, smooth out this message a little bit. And that removes features or details that you want. Embellished means people add things that weren't there. And then leveled is that we'll lose those details. So what this tells you is that you need to communicate multiple times through multiple channels, multiple ways, right? To multiple groups. So you want to put that message out there in writing, you want to put it out there in a meeting, you want to put it out there on your website, you want to make a video, you need to have multiple ways to get that message across if you want to beat that 20% target. The other reason that we want to, that can encourage change is the idea of a burning platform. This, when we're talking again, think about those big pillars again. We're standing on the pillar and I'm not moving, right? Because I don't feel the need to move. But if my pillar starts to shake or it's getting wobbly, I might be willing to jump to that other pillar because I don't feel safe where I am. And that other pillar looks sturdier. So, and this is metaphorical, of course, but there actually was the idea of a burning platform actually came out of the Piper Alpha oil rig fire that was in the North Sea of Britain. It was out there on the ocean. They're hanging out there drilling for oil, and all of a sudden there was an explosion on the oil rig, and flames, oil all over the water. It's on fire, and people had to make a decision. Do I stay on the rig and try and deal with the fire, or do I jump in the ocean and deal with what's there? So they had to make that change. They had to make that choice in that moment. And it turns out that everybody who jumped lived, and everyone who stayed did not. And that's where that term burning platform comes. It's the idea that you have to make an important decision and there's some level of urgency to it in order to make the change that your organization needs to make. And those, the factors that can be happening there can be internal factors, right? Things like sales metrics or efficiency metrics, or it can be external, right? It can be coming from outside your company. It could be legislative changes. It could be global warming. It could be a political situation or a war. Those kinds of things are all burning platforms. But you still need to explain why. Why are we going to do change? And the way that you can explain why and to think through that change is using what's called a force field analysis. And a force field analysis is when we identify all of the reasons for a change and all the reasons against a change. But if you know that the change is happening, regardless of what the rationale for it is, because we're all in that situation every now and again, right? Where we're this is happening, you will do this. Why would you bother to do a force field analysis? Well, the reason you'd want to do that is it helps you to identify what the issues will be and prepare the organization for the inevitable resistance to change that will be coming. It helps you identify those issues and helps you figure out how you can address them. And so, whoops, sorry about that. And so this is what a force field analysis looks like. You look at the cultural enablers of change and the cultural barriers to change. The reasons, so those rationales for the change and reasons not to change. So an enabler of change is, let's say we're doing a software upgrade. That's just my example right now. And the reason for the change is that they're not going to support the version that we're doing. The reason not to change is because it will cost a lot of money. An enabler of change might be the fact that we require everybody to go and do 6 hours of professional development every year. It's sort of part of how we work, so they could get trained on this software relatively easier. And a barrier to change is that, we have a lot of systems and other software programs that link into that program, and it might be difficult to get those programs to relink together. So looking at that kind of analysis tells you about, one, what you want to talk about, how you want to position the change, and things that you can use to your advantage, like the trainings that always happen, and things that might work against you in creating that change.
Deb, we do have a question from Duana, and the question is simply education change. Duana, do you want to clarify a little bit about what you're getting at there? I see you're muted. Can you? There you go.
Yeah. Hi. So I was listening to her talk about the different changes, and I'm more that's where my passion is with the education change, but more so like changing. I guess I want to help change like how training teachers transition into school system, or really into the CPS school system. That's where my focus is right now, and advocating for new teachers. I am a new teacher myself, so I want to put that out there. But to advocate for new teachers and different things that I've been observing within my first year of things that I feel like I can help improve. But I'm still new myself, so when she was talking about change and things of that nature, and I was just like, okay, how could I apply it also to within like education and getting my voice heard, because I am a new teacher. And so not trying to just jump out there. I know I have a lot to learn still, but with the things that I'm seeing in the modern time, how can I get my voice out there to advocate and to also gain more knowledge and deeper understanding for educational change, so that when I do speak, as you said, I'll be clear in what I'm saying and confident, and getting the message across. Yeah. So it's not, everything you were saying, I was taking in, it was resonating, but I was like, okay, how do I go about it within education?
Yeah, so
that's a lot. I'm sorry.
No, this is a great question, because you're applying the information, and that's exactly what this is for, right? So think about CPS as a big system, and culture. When we talk about cultural enablers or cultural barriers, culture is about how decisions are made in an organization. There's lots of fancy definitions of culture, but really what it comes down to in a moment is, what is the process that creates change? How are decisions made? And so observe that in your organization. How do things happen? What makes change in your culture of the organization? So the CPS system, you can break that down into the school, or you could break that down into your department. But whatever, I would start small. If it were me, I would look at your department and see how decisions are made and observe that. And then think about the specific change you want to make and say, what about our culture would help make that happen? And what about our culture would stop that from happening? and then go back to reasons for change. What's a logical reason for this to occur? And what's a reason for it not to happen? And going through that process will help you formulate your persuasive points to drive the change forward. So it will help you identify more specifically exactly the kinds of things you should be saying, and the concerns that are going to pop up, because obviously concerns pop up. So the next thing is about involving people in change. People support what they help to create. So involvement is critical, right? Involvement's about action. It's about doing, while commitment is about how you think about it. So when we're seeking commitment, we're using persuasion, right? Gaining commitment is connected to strategy. And again, that communication piece, poor communication, poor commitment. And there's lots of strategies that you can use to get commitment. And here's a couple of them. So do something that demonstrates your own commitment to the change process, right? So if you're doing something, get in there and, get in the trenches. The other is the idea of reciprocity. I'm going to, this is boiled down to a very transactional thing, but I'm going to recognize you and reward you for past performance. And after I do that, I'm going to ask for change. And then in that regard, people are more likely to get on board with your change. The other idea is about how we talk to people when we're trying to drive change. And we need to imbue them with the qualities that we see in the change. So if we need people who are innovative, or we need people who are willing to go an extra mile, right? We want to talk to people. When we talk to them, I said, okay, I know this is such an innovative group that we can handle this problem. So we put that quality on the group, and then the group believes us. They probably are innovative, and you need to make sure that you're authentic when you do this. But when we call that quality forward out of them, they know what we're asking for then, and so they can give it to us. The other thing is that, as a general rule, people are loss averse. They are much more concerned about losing something that they already have than to gain something that is equally valuable in the future. So when we talk about change, we don't necessarily want to focus on the things that we're losing. We need to focus on the things that we are gaining, or ways in which we need to do this in order to stay competitive in our organization. And whether that's an educational organization, or it's a business, or it's a not-for-profit, or it's government, the idea that we have to do this in order to be efficient and competitive is important. The other thing is give good reasons. And I know this sounds really silly, but a lot of times we drive change and we don't tell people why. And I got to tell you, if people don't tell me why, I'm not going to do it. I need to understand what the implication of this is and why it's important. And people are 48% more likely to follow through on a requested behavior if you tell them why, and it's a good reason. The other thing is again, to a trust question, and people tend to trust people that are similar to themselves. So seek out commonalities with the people with whom you are working, so that they can see that you're okay with this, and we're sort of similar, so let's go with that. So driving that commonality. The other piece is about disclosing first. Not all change will be 100% positive, right? There's downsides to everything. And so it's important that you acknowledge those downsides, because people will see that as being honest, and it is honest, and transparent. If they discover that downside without you and they talk about it in the hallway, they're going to be far more likely to resist change than if you'd been straightforward with them. And the other thing that you can do to gain commitment is create a social proof. And a social proof is basically somebody else who did this change and lived to tell the tale, right? And had a good outcome. How can we bring that person's experience into the things that we are trying to do? And one of the things that you can do that's particularly powerful with that is bring that person to your announcement meeting. We're going to we're going to do this software transition, and here's somebody from a similar kind of organization that also did it, and this is their story. And then have them explain how it went for them and where the learning was and where the bumps in the road or the hiccups were, so people feel like that they that there's a model for success. And then we get to resistance, right? Change is never painful. Only the resistance to change is painful. And this is true. The resistance is painful, but people resist for reasons, right? And I encourage you as a change management person to consider that when people are resisting change, they are trying to protect something. And so thinking about that instead of, I want you to comply with my request, is a more powerful and helpful way to think about resistance. So people who are resisting or offering input or comments or what you might perceive as criticism, think of them as people who are seeking to be involved. Invite them into that conversation. Let them help you address the things that look to be problematic about the change. And that's going to, one, reduce the reasons for resistance, and two, help you incorporate the knowledge and experiences that the staff bring to this question. So these are actually some formulas for change. The first one here is by Dick Beckhard, I want to say back in 1976, which was quite some time ago. But basically what his formula for change is that the dissatisfaction with the status quo multiplied by the vision of the future, multiplied by the clarity of our first step toward that vision, must be greater than the resistance that is present, or change will not occur. So what that means, let's break that down. So if there is no dissatisfaction with the status quo, that makes that value 0, right? 0 multiplied by anything becomes 0, right? So you're not going to have change then. Same thing with vision, same thing with first steps. So there needs to be value in each of those areas. So there needs to be value in the dissatisfaction. There needs to be a value in the vision, and there needs to be a value in those first steps, so that when we get to the point of trying to implement, we know where we're going, and those things are greater than the resistance that's there. This other one is, what's his name? Burt. It's Burt is the last name of the person who came up with this. And basically what they say is the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of change, because change is not easy, right? And then change will occur. If we don't have a little bit of pain, change won't happen because nobody's motivated. So we think about that motivation, right? The burning platform, the call of shared vision as things that will help drive us forward. Another thing is the idea of symbolic action. When you go to like the Olympics or something, right? They open with an opening ceremony and they light the big torch, right? That's a symbolic action. It opens the games. We know it's the beginning. It's the start of something. At a race, they fire the gun and people run, or horses run, or whatever. We have a moment when we know that we're supposed to go. And that's the importance of symbolic action, is understanding that it's the moment we're going to do something that can help us launch this thing, and we're going to all move in that direction. The thing that's important of that is that we need to make that symbolic action tangible. We need to be involved in it, hands-on creation. We need to let go of what was before and then implement change. And so if we're looking at it a process, this is what we would do. We would talk about our future state. We'd paint a picture of what that future state is. We're going to be very purposeful in discussing it. Then we're going to engage in some kind of hands-on activity. Another example of this is when they, do a groundbreaking for a building, right? Those guys go out there with the big silver shovels or gold shovels and they dig that first hole. They're not helping, right? But it's a symbolic moment, right? Where they're engaging in a hands-on activity. And it's even better if they allowed everybody to kind of scoop some dirt. But the idea is to get people involved and participate in a broad way, in a concrete, visual, and participatory way to help people see where we're going. They're not helping build the building, but they are involved in it. And once you're involved, people support what they help to create. There's greater connection to the project. There's greater commitment. So the mindset is changed and our hands-on are changed. And this, of course, goes to the real importance of what leaders do. It's creating that vision and managing culture, really. So how those decisions get made. And culture eats strategy for lunch, right? That the only important thing, the most important thing that leaders do is manage their culture and demonstrate effective decision-making and exceptional messaging and influence through those processes. So culture is key to driving change. And you're saying to yourself, well, how do I know what to do in culture? That's kind of a big question. You look at a model. And this is the Weisbord 6-box model, which is a personal favorite of mine. But there's other models. There's the STAR model. There's the ADKAR model. There's Burke-Litwin. There's tons of them. This is my favorite, so I always talk about it. But what a model does is it breaks an organization down into a little bit more manageable bite-sized pieces, so you know where you want to focus your energy. So in terms of our software change that I've been talking about, right? This example. So what's the purpose of the business we're in? How does that software change support the purpose of our business? How is it going to impact the structure and how we divide the work up? Is it going to be more equal? Is it going to be better flow of information? How are we going to reward people for participating in this change? Do we have adequate coordinating technologies? Meaning, have we trained people? Will our IT system run this software? And how do we manage conflict among people as we're doing this? Because there's inevitably going to be miscommunication. There's going to be technological issues. There's going to be some bickering over how workflow should go. How do we manage that? And then leadership. How do we keep these boxes in balance? And how are we connecting with the outside environment to keep this project on track? So when you use a model, you can see where your organization is stronger and where your organization needs shoring up. And that's what's really useful about 6-box model or Burke-Litwin or STAR model or anything. It helps you identify exactly where you need to pay more attention during the process. And speaking of process, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing, according to John Deming. And so when we're looking at change in terms of process, we look at things like capacity. Do we have the resources we need to actually execute this plan? Do we know what steps we have to take to implement this? What exactly do we need to do? Engagement. And do we have people who are supportive of this change individually? Are they willing to lead it? Are they willing to make a sacrifice for it? Do they believe in the vision of where we're going? And how do we leverage those champions? And then culture. How does the current culture align with the needs of this change? And that goes again to that purpose piece in Weisbord's model. Does this change support the culture? If it doesn't, there needs to be a conversation about why or why not. And then we have to look at people, because people are when we're getting into that implementation piece, right? We need to have people involved and what they're doing with the change. So there's various aspects of psychological safety, right? There's inclusion safety. Do I feel accepted and heard? There's learner safety, where we're trying to master something new, like new software. We're trying to get our sea legs on it, so to speak, so that we can work with it comfortably. Contributor safety, which is the need to participate and make an impact, to help others, is generally where we go with that. And then there's challenger safety, which is I feel safe enough in this team of people to say things that I'm concerned about or that I feel the need to criticize. And we want to have those levels of psychological safety among our teams so that they can be in a healthy place where they will fully consider issues and they will be able to be productive. And so this is the recipe for a healthy team, that behavior is a function of the person and the environment. But we can also say that behavior of groups is a function of the group and the environment. So the nature of those interactions with people in a group environment, what's the environment doing for us and what's the individuals doing for us? So think about those two factors as the thing that drives behavior. So, one second. In terms of the team's composition, so the group itself, we want to use an idea called the max mix, which is a wide variety of functional roles, a wide variety of years of service. We want different levels of employment. So somebody who's been there for a year and somebody who's been there for 15 years, so that we can see it with new eyes and we can see it with history, right? And we want to have a wide variety of demographics on that team. We want to have different genders, we have different races, different ethnicities, different ages, and a wide variety of functions. So, you know, we want somebody from marketing, we want somebody from manufacturing, we want somebody from human resources, so that you have multiple perspectives present in the group. And so going to the interaction piece, there's a great little book called The Human Group by Fred Homans that was written back in 1950. And he looked at behavior, how we behave, as part of what's called the AIS cycle: activity, interaction, and sentiment. And the idea is basically that when we do something in a group, it's an activity, and that activity drives an interaction with another person. And that interaction with that person makes a feeling in us, right? Oh, that was really great. I love working with Lori. I'm going to do that again, right? Or, oh, that did not go so well. I'm not going to work with Susie again. See how that cycle can go around. So the sentiment that's developed in our interactions with people drives the level or our preference to interact with them again. So there's a little cycle there. We also have Barbara Fredrickson's work called the broaden and build paradigm, which takes that sentiment piece and puts it in a different light. So if our emotions after an interaction with Susie were negative, we create what's called convergent thought. That drives our thinking more narrowly. And if we have positive emotions after that interaction with Lori, we have divergent thought. So we create more options for ourselves. And so I'm going to give you an example of this. So imagine that you're a caveman, right, in your cave, and you're roasting your woolly mammoth over the fire with all of your cave brothers and sisters. And into the mouth of the cave jumps a saber-toothed tiger. Holy cow, we're freaking out. What do? We fight, we flight, or we freeze, right? We do one of those three things because that's what our brain does for us. It's an evolutionary psychology principle that we drive that convergent thought when we have negative emotions. And then when in actuality, we have way more than three choices there, right? It's not just fight, flight, or freeze. We could throw the mammoth meat to the saber-toothed tiger. We could, there's 100 things. We could create a distraction. We could, whatever. So the negative emotions, though, drive that convergent thinking. And so when we translate this to what happens to humans, and we see convergent thought come out of negative emotions. And I have a personal example of this. I have a lot of brothers and sisters. And during the height of the pandemic, we all wanted to go visit my father, who's elderly. And we were concerned for his well-being about people being vaccinated. And I have one sister who's not vaccinated, and she refused to do it. And we're like, well, you can't, Dad's 80, you can't do that because he could get sick. And I couldn't think of any way around this problem at all. And I was talking with my brother, I'm talking to my sister. We just could not figure out how to bring our family together to see my father during the pandemic. And I told my husband about it. I'm like, oh, Fraze, I don't know what to do about, this pandemic thing and visiting Dad. And he goes, well, why doesn't everybody test before you go? I literally hit myself in the head, and I'm like, really? How did I not think of that? And the reason I didn't think of that was because I was upset by what was happening. And it's not because I didn't know about testing, because who didn't? I could not get my brain to get out of that convergent thinking. And so that's the example that we still do this as humans. And so if we can get our activity, interaction, and sentiment into a positive place where we have divergent thought, you could see those things kind of running around and then getting broad and broader and broader. We come up with more ideas. We come up with more creative solutions, or we just allow one to hit us in the head and say, what were you thinking, right? But those things happen in negative emotional states when we're trying to solve a pressing problem in a crisis, or not even in a crisis, right? So sustaining change. To sustain change, we use data a lot. And I love this quote by Ronald Coase, the economist, who says, if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. And I think that's funny because eventually you can get some truth out of data, but you can also get mistruths out of data. So it's important that we don't just rely solely on quantitative data when we're creating a sustaining process for change. We also want to rely on other methods. So we want to talk about how our change is really relevant still. Are we in alignment with our goal? Are we better supporting our purpose as an organization? So the hard data is the numbers, right? Do we have quantitative proof that we accomplished our goal? But I think the more powerful data is the success stories, right? Success stories are those anecdotal things that happen during change that are compelling and inspire us to continue to do things. Because it's very easy to roll back. It's so comfortable the other way we used to do things. I just want to do that again. But it's harder to keep going forward. And the other thing we can do is rededication practices, is allow people to try different parts of the change so that they can have an experience of doing a different aspect of the work. And that will help keep people on task and focused, rededicating themselves to what it is that we're trying to do. And that is the end of my talk. And I am absolutely happy to take questions at this point. And I did it with 5 minutes to spare.
Are there any questions from anybody? First of all, Deb, thank you so much. Every time I've seen you present, I end up learning things. It's thought-provoking. It's energizing. It makes me think of my own organization. It makes me think of issues at home that I've got a new perspective on how to address, all kinds of things. So I hope all of you had the same kind of experience. I see, it was fantastic, such great information. Thank you so much from Cherie Yates. Thank you, Cherie. Are there any questions from anyone at this point?
Oh, you're welcome for the examples. Hey, Glenda.